When it comes to video games, my all-time favorite genre is fighting games, or beat 'em ups. One-on-one action that allows you to inflict damage on your opponents until they are done for. The fighting styles have varied over the years and have brought countless successful fighting games, from the beginning when they started with this, to this. There is nothing quite like fighting games, and I will be listing my top 15 fighting games of all time over the next 3 videos. They will range from old school to recent years. Now I was going to do a top 10, but there were just so many fighting games I was leaving out, so I thought I'll extend it to 15. And there were still a few that I was leaving out, so what can you do? I will do some honorable mentions in the last video, but these are my top 15 fighting games of all time. Starting today from number 15 to 11. Number 15, Virtua Fighter 2. This was the first ever 3D fighter that I had ever played. I was beginning the transition of 16-bit consoles to the next generation, and it felt like a whole new gaming experience. I had been so used to the 2D fighting style that this took a little bit of getting used to. Once I mastered the basics, it was full steam ahead. There are beautiful 3D backgrounds, the ability to sidestep and beat your opponents by way of ring out. Given the success of its rival Tekken, it is somewhat surprising that Virtua Fighter series didn't quite reach the same heights. One of the creators involved in Virtua Fighter quit Sega to join Namco and went on to be part of the team that created Tekken. Now, Virtua Fighter 2 is not my favorite Virtua Fighter game overall, but I included it in this list for historical and sentimental reasons. I did purchase it from the PlayStation Network store for my PS3 in recent years, and it is still every bit as fun as I remembered it. I don't play it as often, but every now and again, I give it a whirl, and it is a great nostalgia trip to experience. Number 14, Mortal Kombat 2. I had just gotten to grips with the first Mortal Kombat, and it really was an alternative to Street Fighter 2. Using motion capture of real martial artists as the main fighters, Mortal Kombat took fighting games to a brand new stage. I had been aware of the impending arrival of Mortal Kombat 2 via games magazines and word of mouth, and I was eagerly anticipating its release. I had my next door neighbor who owned a copy, and I was over at his place all the time. Yes, there were other games on offer, but Mortal Kombat 2 was one of my favorite games at the time. It took the basics of the first game and upped the ante with a bigger roster of 12 characters and 2 killer bosses in Motaro and Shao Kahn. The addition of newbies like Jax, Melina, Kung Lao, Baraka, Kitana to the already established Liu Kang, Raiden and Johnny Cage made for an even better fighting experience. The main boss from part 1, Shang Tsung, was now a younger and playable character. I was disappointed in the exclusion of Kano and Sonya Blade, especially as Sonya was one of my go-tos in the first Mortal Kombat game. The level of brutality was even higher with ferocious looking fatalities, which had been the main source of controversy with the first game, which led to the infamous showdown in the US Congress between Sega and Nintendo. The Mortal Kombat series has evolved to even bigger heights since the heyday of Mortal Kombat 2. And admittedly, I'm not an avid Mortal Kombat player these days, but I will always look back on the days when I first got into Mortal Kombat 2 in the world of fighting games. Mortal Kombat 2 took it to a next level, and for pure nostalgia, it is included in my list of favorite fighting games ever.
Flawless victory.
Number 13, Tekken 7. Okay, now I have to say, despite the game's iconic stance in the fighting games world, I am not the most avid Tekken fighter. As a matter of fact, in the entire history of the game, going all the way back to 1994, so we're talking 29 years, almost 30 now, I have never owned a Tekken game until around 2010 when I first got my hands on StreetFighter Cross Tekken, and a few years ago when I finally got my hands on Tekken 7, which admittedly was largely because of Akuma. And for the life of me, I never understood why I never got into the series, The game plays very well with some killer combos and a 3D fighting style that I had grown accustomed to largely because of the Virtua Fighter games. Moves list is very long and not comparing at all to Street Fighter, which has just a handful of moves, but it is a very fluid 3D fighter and a lot of fun to play, especially with other casual gamers. My knowledge on this game is almost at zero. Other than a handful of characters, I am not familiar at all with the fighters in this game. Thank God for Google and Wikipedia. So why is it on your list if you're unfamiliar with the series? That's a fair point, and it's simple. I enjoy the fighting style. It is fun to play, great once you've mastered the combo set, and as a 3D fighter, the best I have ever played, and that even includes the recent Virtua Fighter Fighting Evolution. But all in all, I could not do a top fighting video game list and not include Tekken, so here's to a legendary fighting game franchise and an awesome 3D fighting game. Number 12, Fighters Megamix. The second entry for Virtua Fighter in this list. I first became aware of this game when I watched an episode of the great UK games TV show Games Master. It was being reviewed, and it is a game that brings together two fighting franchises, Fighting Vipers and Virtua Fighter. I had never played Fighting Vipers before, so I was completely unaware of the history, but I was a big Virtua Fighter fan, so I was immediately sold on this game. It has a big roster of 32 characters, including 12 hidden characters, which become available as you complete the single player mode sections. Everyone from the Virtua Fighter 2 roster is present, including the final boss Dural, and as for Fighting Vipers, it took this game for me to get accustomed to who they were. There were odd characters in the game, like the kiddie versions of Akira and Sarah, Hornet the car from Daytona, and the AM2 palm tree. This gave the game a slightly goofy feel to it with all these characters. When it comes to fighting games, I just prefer my characters to be serious, but then that's just me. Several hours were clocked on this game, and even though there is a lack of proper game endings for the characters, I played this game for hours on end for well over a year and a half from when it was released. It took what I enjoyed about Virtua Fighter 2 and expanded it with this massive crossover. Number 11, Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo. The granddaddy of fighting games was Street Fighter 2, the game that gave birth to a whole new gaming genre and spawned many sequels, clones, and rivals. Now, because there were a few updated versions of this game, I went with this one as it was the last in the original Street Fighter 2 series. All the characters we had seen in the Street Fighter series up until that point were here. From the original 8 and the 4 bosses of Shadowloo, to the new 4 characters added in the Super Street Fighter series, to this one which was the debut of a character that has gone on to iconic status in the game and in this genre, the mysterious Akuma. The game also has a turbo option which meant for faster gameplay, much like the OG Street Fighter 2 Turbo. By the time Super Street Fighter 2 came around, all characters felt like their own individuals with their own unique sounds, as opposed to what we heard with all the male characters sounding very similar, or rather alike, with Street Fighter 2. So with Street Fighter 2 Turbo here, it felt, well to me anyway, like the truest form and the best of the Street Fighter 2 era. All the basics we had learned from Street Fighter was here, with the added new feature of super combos, which is now a staple of all fighting games. The opening intro with Ryu was updated from the previous game to include Chun-Li, Cammy and Akuma, giving it a much bigger feel than ever before. The game modes were your standards like one-on-one with the CPU and versus with other players. I played mostly this on my Sega Saturn, which was part of the Street Fighter collection, as it had not launched on the Super Nintendo like its predecessor. But as far as the OG series goes, Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo is my favourite of the originals and makes it on number 11 on my list. Join me on the next video when I count down from number 10 to number 6 on my top 15 fighting games of all time.